Long before the civil rights movement, before Martin Luther King or Malcolm X, black leaders were already organizing conventions, publishing newspapers, and building a political agenda for their freedom. This was America's first black political movement, and you probably never heard of it. These gatherings, known as the Colored Conventions, brought together visionary thinkers and strategists like Frederick Douglass, Henry Highland Garnet, and Martin Delany. What they debated and built in the 1800s shaped the future of black political organizing for generations. Starting as early as 1830, black leaders from across the country began holding formal conventions to discuss the status and future of African Americans. These meetings, known as the Colored Conventions, would continue for over 70 years. They weren't symbolic. These were serious political gatherings, held in churches, community halls, and sometimes even under threat of violence. Delegates traveled long distances at their own expense. They elected officers, passed resolutions, and published proceedings. The issues they tackled: everything from education and voting rights to labor discrimination and self-defense. These conventions were the first national black political network in the United States, and possibly in the world. They weren't waiting for permission. They were writing their own blueprint for liberation. They weren't waiting for permission. They were writing their own blueprint for liberation. But this growing political activity also provoked backlash. White mobs and hostile local authorities frequently tried to disrupt, intimidate, or sabotage these meetings, surrounding churches, issuing threats, and even physically attacking delegates. In 1838, Pennsylvania Hall in Philadelphia was burned to the ground by a white mob just days after opening its doors to interracial meetings. In 1842, a black political meeting in Philadelphia was violently disrupted. In New York and Ohio, black churches and convention halls were surveilled, harassed, and in some cases vandalized. Cincinnati, another major hub for free black life, saw repeated attacks on black neighborhoods and disruptions of black-led gatherings. These were not isolated incidents. They were part of a broader campaign to crush black political momentum through fear and violence. Yet, despite these threats, black leaders pressed forward, organizing smarter, traveling farther, and speaking louder. These violent attempts to sabotage progress only strengthened the resolve of black leaders to organize smarter, louder, and across greater distances. Frederick Douglass was born enslaved in Maryland in 1818. He was taken from his mother, never knew his father, and by the time he was 7, was working on a plantation where literacy was forbidden and beatings were a way of life. But something in him never accepted slavery as natural. He began secretly teaching himself to read, using Bible pages, street signs, and discarded books. This act of resistance, learning to read, would become one of the defining themes of his life. In 1838, at age 20, he escaped slavery by disguising himself as a sailor and boarding a northbound train with false papers. He arrived in New York City with nothing but his mind and his mission. Soon after, he began speaking at abolitionist meetings. His powerful presence and first-hand account of slavery stunned audiences. William Lloyd Garrison, the editor of The Liberator, quickly took notice. Douglass became one of the Liberator's most important voices, not just as a subject, but as a contributor. He gave speeches at Garrison's events, helped expand the movement, and proved that black people didn't need anyone to speak for them. They could speak for themselves. But as Douglass grew into his own voice, his relationship with Garrison began to unravel. Garrison wanted moral persuasion. Douglass saw the need for political action. Garrison rejected the Constitution. Douglass came to see it as a weapon. The Constitution is a glorious liberty document. Frederick Douglass. Their break was public and painful, but it marked a turning point. Douglass stopped being the voice of Garrison and became the voice of Black America. This split also revealed deeper tensions around paternalism in the abolitionist movement. Many white abolitionists, while publicly supporting black freedom, still treated black leaders as secondary partners. Douglass and others grew increasingly critical of this dynamic, where black voices were celebrated only as long as they stayed within limits set by white allies. After the Civil War, many white abolitionists abandoned the movement altogether, considering their job done. But black leaders knew the fight had just begun for land, citizenship, protection, and power. The disillusionment with white allies who withdrew from the cause exposed a hard truth: that real freedom would require not just legal change, but independent black leadership and institutions. In 1847, Douglass founded the North Star newspaper. He invited Martin Delany to join as co-editor, and for a time the two men worked together to shape a black-led press, independent of white control. But their visions would soon clash. Martin Delany was born free in 1812 in Virginia. His mother moved the family to Pennsylvania to avoid laws that would have enslaved her children. Delany was brilliant, bold, and unflinching. He trained in medicine, studied at Harvard, and was later forced out due to racism. He experienced the limits of white acceptance, even as a free black man. In 1852, he published one of the earliest and most important works of black political thought: The Condition, Elevation, Emigration, and Destiny of the Colored People of the United States. Delany believed America would never fully accept black people as equals. The only path to real liberation might be through emigration. Black people should build their own nation in Africa or the Caribbean. Self-reliance, land ownership, and black-controlled institutions were essential. He joined Douglass at the North Star, but their partnership was short-lived. Douglass still believed in fighting for equality within America. Delany wanted to leave it behind. Their split wasn't personal, it was philosophical. Douglass chose citizenship. Delany chose sovereignty. Both men were right. Together they represented the full spectrum of 19th century black political strategy. Through his writings and leadership, Martin Delany came to be known as the father of black nationalism, long before Marcus Garvey or Malcolm X. He also traveled to Liberia and Nigeria in 1859 to 1860, seeking land where African Americans could establish a sovereign black nation, but returned to the United States at the outbreak of the Civil War, determined to fight for the liberation of his people. During the Civil War, Delany made history as the first African American field officer in the U.S. Army, commissioned as a major by President Lincoln for his efforts to recruit black troops. His bold vision of black self-determination, economic independence, and immigration laid the ideological foundation for generations of black nationalists to come. The tension between Delany and Douglass, between black independence and integration, would echo throughout black history. It became a recurring theme, re-emerging in the ideological split between leaders of the civil rights movement in the 1950s and 60s, the reformist approach of Martin Luther King Jr. versus the radical nationalism of Malcolm X. Delany's legacy proves that these questions about place, power, and identity are as old as the struggle itself. Over time, the colored conventions evolved from small gatherings into large, coordinated efforts with regional and national significance. By the mid-19th century, conventions were happening almost every year, especially in key states like Pennsylvania, Ohio, and New York. Each meeting became a platform to respond to new challenges, from the Fugitive Slave Act to growing anti-black violence in the North. Delegates developed proposals for black education, published petitions, and created community mutual aid funds. Some of the most significant conventions included the 1830 Philadelphia Convention, led by Richard Allen, which called for self-reliance and community building. The 1843 Buffalo Convention, where Garnet delivered his call to rebellion. The post-emancipation conventions of the 1860s, which shifted focus to labor rights, voting, and Reconstruction. These gatherings were more than resistance. They were infrastructure. They were vision. They showed the world that Black America was not passive. It was organized, determined, and ready to define its own future. The conventions also laid the foundation for a tradition of traveling black speakers and public intellectuals who moved from city to city, church to church, sharing knowledge, building solidarity, and calling communities to action. These early lecture circuits united black communities across the country and transformed public speaking into a vital tool of political resistance, a tradition of grassroots mobilization that continues to this day, from pulpits to podiums to protest stages. Today, when people think of black political power, they think of the 1960s, but the real roots go back 130 years earlier. The colored conventions were the first national political strategy led by African Americans. Douglass showed how education, publishing, and politics could reshape a nation. Delany reminded us that dignity might require building outside of it. Garnet taught us that sometimes change doesn't come politely. Together, they left us a blueprint: organize, speak, print, resist, and build. Black freedom was not given, it was planned. If you didn't learn this in school, it's not your fault. But now that you know, share this episode. Help restore the truth about Black resistance, leadership, and vision. Thanks for watching. If you found this video insightful, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us continue uncovering the hidden truths of history. Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and we'll see you in the next video.